Hello everyone, welcome to our today's webinar on ITIL 4, What's New and Changed. If you have a question, please type them in the Q&A widget that appears at the bottom of your screen. We will try to answer them at the end of this webinar. We also have poll questions. Request you to participate in it accordingly. I now welcome our speaker, Mr. Suresh GP, who is one of the top 25 thought leaders in service management recognized by HDI. Suresh GP has more than 16 plus years of IT experience and specialized in IT, service management, IT governance, Agile, DevOps, and business relationship. Suresh, as a principal consultant, does consulting, trainings, simulations, and implementation services for DevOps to Fortune 2000 companies. He was awarded the ITSM Contributor Award by ITSM Singapore in 2013 and 4 BRM Excellence Awards at BRM Connect 2017. Over to you, Suresh.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Yuvraj. Thank you, team, Freshworks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. I'm extremely delighted to be part of this session. So I first of all want you to all stay safe. I know this is testing times, but I wish you and everyone within your family and your near and dear ones stay safe. It's very important that we focus on making sure that we will pass this. Okay, this is a set of Freshworks digital transformation series, the first of its kind that we are doing today as part of ITIL 4, What's New and Changed. As Yuvraj said, we have a couple of poll questions that we will start to just gain an understanding of your background. Have you had experience on ITIL version 1, version 2, 3, and how we can kind of make it much more interesting to all of you, right? Throughout the session, you can actually post your questions on the questions panel, and we will take the questions either midway or after the end of the session. It's a 1-hour session where we intend to cover 45 minutes of discussion, 45 minutes of content, as well as 15 minutes of Q&A, right? So with no further ado, I will kind of move forward on the agenda for today. As you would have seen the webinar registration, our focus today is to look at what has changed from ITIL version 3. And if you remember, we no longer call it ITIL version 4, we call it as ITIL 4. And throughout the session, if you want to kind of tweet, my Twitter handle is @SureshGP, and you can kind of post questions if you have any. We will also be starting to focus on a service lifecycle in the ITIL version 3 days. How does it transform to a service value system? So we will talk about the service value system. There is a focus of shift from process, where we had the ITIL process, 26, 27 process that we had. Now we focus on practices. So what's the key difference between process and practice and why this was essential? And as you all know, we are in an age of digital disruption. Now, what it also means that as part of digital disruption, there are so many different frameworks, methodologies, and best practice that evolve. So we need to look at whether ITIL is kind of stepping up the game. We all know that the last version of ITIL was in 2011, and now we are in 2020. 9 years, there's so much things that have changed, right? We have moved to cloud, we have moved to mobility, we have come into Agile, DevOps, SRE, site reliability engineering, and so much of things. So we're going to talk about how in the new version of ITIL 4, how is Agile, Lean, DevOps incorporated as part of value chains. And then we'll focus on guiding principles. And also you are all kind of keen to upskill yourself in the digital age. So we're going to talk about the certification scheme. So if you are an ITIL version 3 expert, how do you move to ITIL 4? Do I need to take ITIL 4 and all of those questions, right? So we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, but I hope you will enjoy along with me in this whole session, okay? So let's start with the first poll question. Team, if you could just pull up the poll question number 1. We'll give a minute time for people to fill in. This is very important for us to understand whether you're a beginner or an intermediate or an expert in terms of ITIL. You could think about any of the versions, be it version 1, 2, 3. but really want to understand where you are so that we can start to focus on the discussion much more appropriately. So we have 10 out of 29 voted. So that's about 34%. So we'll still give a few 30 seconds. So please take some time to start filling those details. We'll just give another 20 more seconds. So last 5 seconds. So you have 65% voted. Yep. So I'll share the results. So we have about 67% as beginners, 19% know about ITIL in an intermediate stage, and we have 14% on expert. So that's a good mix for today. We'll kind of start to take this forward. Let's move on to our second question. Sorry. So can we go and pull up the second poll question? And you'll have another minute for you to kind of answer that. So keep your questions also flowing in so that we know we will take that part in a subsequent time slots. So I see already people starting to open up some questions, so you can also do parallelly. But first, finish the poll number 2. Is the poll 2 enabled, Yuvraj? Because I think people are not able to see the...
Yes, Suresh, it is enabled, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what are your expectations from the webinar? Is it going to be informational content? Is it educational content or practical industry use cases? So what do you want to kind of get out of the session? So again, we'll give about a minute's time. It just opened up. So let's kind of start to put some content around it. We have about 61% voted so far. We'll give another 30 seconds. Okay, last 3-4 seconds and we will wrap it up. Okay, so we'll end the poll now. And let's see if you can share the results. So from what we have seen, we have about 64% wanting to have practical industry use cases. Yeah, we have a couple of use cases that we'll talk about. There were 28% on informational content and 8% on educational content. So we'll try to cover all of them together so that we will be able to have a meaningful discussions, and it'll be worth your time to take away some of those learnings back to your workplace. Okay. So thanks for that, and let's move on. So we're going to start our content from what has changed from ITIL version 2 to ITIL 4. So if you kind of look at my screen, and I'll give you a bit of background, ITIL stands for IT Infrastructure Library. So if you are in the erstwhile days of network storage, database, your Active Directory, your middleware and stuff like that, those were the focus of infrastructure management. In the version 2 days, I'm talking about somewhere around 2001 to 2005, was more, in fact, the end of 2000, up to 2010, we had this version 2 that is focusing on service support and service delivery. So service support used to have this incident problem change and stuff like that, whereas service delivery was more focusing on availability management, capacity management, IT service continuity management, and so on and so forth. In version 3, which came in 2011, we focused on a service lifecycle approach. Now, what do you mean by service lifecycle approach? Right from the time you have a customer asking for something till the time he gets value out of it. So they broke down into different elements that we talk at part of service strategy, service design, service transition, service operations, and continual service improvement. In version in 4, we are kind of looking at a complete different dimension that focuses on service value systems and service value chains. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about value systems and value chains. But what is important is, at the end of the day, if you are signing up for an airline experience, right? So you go on a flight in Indigo or Jet Airways or Emirates, you need to kind of look at the entire value chain, right from the booking of your tickets to setting your baggage and reaching the destination on time. The entire value chain will have to be orchestrated. So today, I'm glad that ITIL 4 focuses on the entire value system rather than just looking at process and tools and people, right? So we need to look at holistic end-to-end value chain. So from a core volume perspective, the version 2 had 7 books, out of which the most popular books were service support, which we call as the blue book, and service delivery as the red book. In version 3, we had the service strategy, design, transition, operation, CSI, 6 core volumes. Now in 4, we are kind of looking at create, deliver, and support, high velocity IT, drive stakeholder value, and drive performance improvement. Now, one of the things is they are now looking at this as more of a specialist course, right? Now, if you look at the drivers from where version 2 came in, as I said, IT Infrastructure Library, it was predominantly focusing on Office of the Government of Commerce, OGC in the UK, where it started off as a part of infrastructure management. In version 3, we focus on having an integrated service management, how incident and problem are related to each other. Our service design, service transition, service operations are all related together. But in 4, we are starting to think about how can we bring in all the different elements of best practices, Agile, Lean, DevOps, so that in an organization, ITIL doesn't exist alone. We need to kind of understand how the different practices or methodologies or frameworks are kind of intertwined very efficiently so that finally the customer delivers value out of that, right? From a certification standpoint, we had this foundation, practitioner, and master. In version 3, we used to call as intermediate modules, and you were given some points as part of what we do. Like, for example, they had a lifecycle stream, and they had the mainstream focus. Lifecycle was strategy, design, transition, and operations. And then we had something like specialist courses, so which was kind of talk about release control validation. So there were a couple of streams in which you can actually apply, and they were given some credit points. Now in 4, we have 4, which is the ITIL 4 Foundation. This webinar will focus predominantly at a foundation level, but as you start to evolve, like create, deliver, and support, and high velocity IT, they are called specialist course. And if you are already an ITIL V3 expert, if you want to become, there is a bridge course to do to become managing professional, and then you have your master. So you will still have some opportunity if you're already an ITIL V3 expert. You don't need to go through the entire courses to become an expert, but you can actually do the bridge course as part of managing professional. Okay, that's a bird's eye view from how version 2, 3, and 4 has changed. Okay. If you have any questions, put it on the question window. We'll take it offline moving forward. So let's look at ITIL 4. I call this a sneak preview. And remember this, ITIL 4 is a copyright of Axelos. So you will see in all our slides that the intellectual property is owned by Axelos. And as a fellow training organizations, we are also entitled to use it with appropriate copyrights, right? So if you look at ITIL 4, and that's why the swirl logo is important, there are a couple of things, there are a few dimensions. The first one is you will be focusing on value system. So how do you look beyond the delivery of services at an end-to-end, right? When you talk about an airline industry, how do we start from a journey map of booking your tickets to finally reaching a destination on time and making sure that your baggage reaches on time as well, right? Including an in-flight experience, movies, as well as your food, right? The second part, which is a critical element, which you call as guiding principles. And you know, guiding principles are something that is universal that has to be followed across the industry. You might have been aware of the ITIL practitioner course that came in a few years back. And some of those have been inspired from the ITIL practitioner course, the guiding principles. So we're going to talk about that 7 guiding principles. And as I said, there is a shift from looking at pure play processes to practices. Remember that if you look at incident management, just having an incident management process was alone not sufficient. We need to have a tool, like for example, a fresh service as a tool to kind of map to ensure your incidents are logged on time. You have your elements of investigation diagnosis, you have a closure code, you have a notification and all of those stuff, and also some procedures in order to do some troubleshooting. So I think we need to move away from the process-centric to have a holistic aspect of process, tools, people's competencies and stuff to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about process to practices, kind of a shift. The other part that we had, and we have been having that as part of ITIL version 3, is the 4 dimensions. So if you remember the 4 Ps, we talk about people, processes, products, and partners. So products could be your tools, it could be your systems that are available to monitor things. Those are products. So we need to see how that is changing from a dimension of the 4 Ps in the new way of ITIL 4. Last but not the least, we need to integrate it. So with all this new advent of Agile, DevOps, Lean, how do they all make the connection so that when we are talking with the other rest of the teams, we will be able to explain them clearly of how this works in totality, right? So that's the kind of the basic building blocks from an ITIL 4 perspective. And in the subsequent slides, we are going to go into a little more detail on these elements. If you have any questions on this one, I encourage you to start posting the questions here. But quickly kind of asking, if you can take a couple of questions, Yuvraj, right now from what we have discussed so far to just see if you have any.
An anonymous attendee asks how ITIL and DevOps can work together.
Okay, so we will talk about that in terms of the subsequent slides, but giving a very important aspect, ITIL kind of right now focuses on a value stream. So if you look at DevOps talk about continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous delivery across the value chain, which means right from design, build, test, deployment, end to end. Now, this is actually very much aligned with the value stream concept that we will talk about, how we can embed DevOps to sell your services more frequently, deploy more frequently in terms of release management. So there's a tight relationship between release and deployment management as far as DevOps, but we'll go into much more detail.
Thank you, Suresh. We have one more question from Santosh. He asks, can you share a practical use case where ITIL 4, DevOps, and Agile can work together and add value?
Sure. We will talk about it. I'll give you a scenario of how we have done it in our customer engagements. I don't have a slide on that, but we will probably kind of get more into the aspect. Yeah. So we will talk about that. Currently we are only encouraging through post to questions because you're also recording that. So if you have any more further questions, we take it on, right? So we'll move on. Yuvraj will come back again for more. So we kind of talk about 4 dimensions of service management. The earlier we used to have this people, process, products, and partners. Now we are kind of looking at this into a much bigger dimension. Now, why is this looking at a much bigger dimension? Because I think we need to now look at the whole value chain from an enterprise standpoint. So instead of looking at people, we need to look at organizational people. What do you mean by that? Which means your org structure. Now, today we are talking about autonomous teams. So self-organizing teams in Agile. So this is going to be very relevant. How do we kind of be relevant in an Agile way of working? So Spotify talks about squads. So they kind of have autonomous teams, which is cross-functional in nature, to kind of enable them so that we are able to serve our customers much faster. So organizational people is a core dimension of how you kind of enable this cross collaboration. It could also be from application development as well as the infrastructure teams working together. And this is what DevOps also starts to organize on that. The second one is information technology. We know we have a rapid explosion on information technology, be it Internet of Things, blockchain, virtual reality, and all of those stuff will have to go in tandem as to how it fits into our current ways of working in terms of products and services. So our focus currently, be it you're a product-based company or a service-based company, we have to deliver value at the core to the customers. So if you look at the definition of value and definition of a service, according to ITIL version 3, ITIL 4, it is focusing on delivering value and outcomes by managing your risk and cost, but co-creating. The key word in the ITIL 4 term, and I'll tell you why they called us 4, because it was mapped to the Industrial 4.0, Industry 4.0. That's why they kept it as ITIL 4. Now, the focus on that element of ITIL 4 from a particular perspective is how do I deliver value to whether it being product and services so that my customer is still happy in what we are delivering, right? So the focus is just to be value, whether it's going to be product or a service that we deliver. Then we talk about, instead of partners, we also talked about suppliers, right? So suppliers, meaning we need to look at third-party ecosystems. We all know that we alone cannot deliver value. We need to look at our third-party vendors, our tool providers, our partners like Microsoft, Cisco for network. So all of them put together are essential for us to deliver value. So how do we have a meaningful relationship more than the underpinning contracts and OLAs that we talk about? How can we make them much more in a partner ecosystem so that we together can we do this much bigger? The last but not the least is the fourth element, which is we call it as just not process, but also value stream. So look at the, let's say, an Amazon shopping cart experience. We need to look at the end-to-end value stream, right from the time that you place an order inside the system to where it gets published, to going to the warehouse, picking up the inventory, and then kind of shipping it up from a logistic part and also communicating effectively that it reaches on time. So value streams are a critical component of lean. That's why I think lean is already embedded as part of value stream or value stream mapping. So value stream mapping as an exercise talks about what are the value-added activities and what are the non-value-added activities. One example could be if you take enough amount of time to do manual testing, that's a kind of wastage. So can I kind of bring in test automation so that I can kind of run your test scripts much faster and can we move it much more efficiently? And then the dimensions around that we call as PESL, because today we are in a situation like COVID. There is a lot of things affecting environment, political, economical, social, technology. So we need to keep into consensus when we are trying to design new products and services because they kind of influence the whole market. So understanding and being sensitive of those things are very important. And we all are facing the thing today because we all have to kind of work through ensuring that our delivery is not impacted in terms of business continuity. With COVID-19, people are not having desktops that is being shipped and the courier is blocked. So a lot of challenges. So we need to start to keep into this holistically to drive value, right? So every dimension within this value chain impacts us. So remember, organizational people, information and technology, products and partners and suppliers, value stream and process together enable us to deliver better products and service that gives profound value. Okay. Now let's talk about the guiding principle, and this is somewhere I'll try to bring some use case around Agile, Lean, DevOps in our practical engagement. So the first thing is focus on value. Now, in the erstwhile days that we delivered some product or service, we focused on something called a service level agreement, right? We met the contractual obligations, and I say this like a watermelon syndrome, right? The watermelon looks green outside, so all your SLAs are all green, but if you actually break it out, it's bleeding red. The customer is simply bleeding because you have not given proactive communications, and you're having an issue and you have not fixed it fully. It's kind of temporary. So people start to lose value out of that. And so one of the things that we need to focus as a team, be it you're part of the first line support or second line support or application development or business analyst or project management, how can I focus on value for my end users? How can I focus on value for my stakeholders? What is very important for them? So getting that dimension of value from the end user perspective or the consumer perspective, which you call as the outside in approach, right? Not the inside out approach. It's not that you need to sell your products and services. Of course, that's a byproduct. But the focus is to see how can I provide more value so that my customer is happy and he will be with me for a long period of time. Remember, today the customer has got a choice. If you don't deliver value and you don't consistently deliver value, he's going to kind of move on to the next zone. So each and every one in the value chain has to start focusing on what is value in the eye of the beholder. Now, a lot of people, when we start to think about, they want to start something very new, right? They want to kind of run away from the existing process. We say, oh, ITIL 4 has come in. Let's start to build a new process, practice and stuff like that. I think we need to be careful that we should never boil the ocean. Our focus has to be to start where you are, because you already have certain assets that you have built in terms of documentation, in terms of expertise, in terms of skills. Why can't you kind of leverage it? It's the kind of the low-hanging fruits, because the focus is to kind of build the momentum, enable some short wins, and then start moving things much more faster. So do not reinvent the whole wheel. You already have a plethora of resources that you already have, that you have built over a period of time. Try to leverage it. And that's a good starting point for us to move ahead. Progress iteratively with feedback. And if you know about Agile, Agile talks about iterative improvements. Scrum is one of the practice where we talk about, can we deliver something of value, which you call as minimum viable product or an increment every 2 to 4 weeks. So why can't we do the same thing, like looking at our continual service improvement initiatives and look at that as part of our backlog, but every 2 weeks to 4 weeks, we release something that makes people feel good. And we all are kind of having the smartphones, and then it gives us features every 2 weeks. So we are in a world of instant gratification. So one of the things that we need to focus is, can I give iteratively some value that my customers are happy with the way of doing it? And you see today, because of COVID-19, we are getting a lot of requests from people. They are relaxing a few of the subscriptions. They're giving some free models. So that's something that you can kind of take advantage of it. At the end of the day, we all have to deliver value to stay relevant. Okay. And the important part of this exercise is getting quick feedback. So if you get a quick feedback, then you can kind of make some amendments instead of waiting for the whole journey for about 8 months. That used to happen in the waterfall ways of working. But with Agile, we are kind of telling that let's work on not just moving it faster, but also more efficiently, what really matters, right? The next one is collaborate and promote visibility. Now, one of the biggest challenges I see when I work with cross-functional teams is the left hand doesn't know what the right hand does. For example, the application development team, we do not know what this team is doing and what the other team is actually doing. So can I have a common page where I can get an end-to-end view of how to work together as a team? So when you talk about squads, or we're talking about cross-functional teams, how can we kind of piggyback each other to give some things and ensure that we are able to do? One example could be to draw a value stream map right from your design, build, requirements, design, build, test, deploy, and see where each and every team is contributing. So where does the business analyst come into picture? Where does the test engineer comes into picture? Where is the developer into picture? Where is the operations guy or infrastructure management providing us the non-functional requirements to do it? And then start to have a common conversation. Remember, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you did a good job or a bad job. It's about what was the final product. I give this example. One of the things that you all know about a Samsung Galaxy Note issue. The Samsung Galaxy Note issue, what happened was the battery got burned. Now, do you think that you blame that as part of developer or an operations? Think about it for a minute. Whom would you actually put that? Now, some people say it could be developer, some could be table operations, but in my opinion, it's a Samsung's problem, because at the end of the day, customer really doesn't think whether it's developer or the operations guy who goofed it up. For me, it is just Samsung did not do a good job. So it is going to affect invariably your brand image and reputation. And that's why we need to start thinking as one single team. Now, there's one problem about this. We can all say that we are one single team, but you're measured differently. The way you're measuring your development team is number of defects per lines of code. If you look at my operations team, I'm measured by number of tickets I solved on time. So where is the kind of having the common metric that goes across the value chain from developer, tester, BA, Scrum Master, product owner, till the kind of operations guy? And that's what we need to start thinking about. Having a uniform metrics, could be quality is one of the metrics that cuts across the value chain, which equally everybody is contributing to do that. And to promote visibility, you can use the Kanban boards, which gives you a visualization board. So Kanban is a visualization board where you can have a to-do list, work in progress, done, and try to see who is doing what and then start move forward. Think and work holistically. I've had several instances where people have started to look at some local optimization and then it backfires later. So before you make any changes to your production environment or a dev environment or a QA environment, start to think holistically. How is it going to impact? What's going to be looking at your pre-prod environment? How is your staging environment going to look like? And start to have the conversations of impact, including kind of suppressing alerts when you're trying to do a planned downtime, right? Because very importantly, we need to start having a common language as well as know who is impacting what to do it. I had one scenario where one of the sales guys were rolling out an application fast because they thought it was important for a sales purpose, but that put the entire system down because they did the change on their own. And then they had to kind of follow up the protocols, because if it had gone through a change advisory board, we could have actually handled this much better. So it's not just taking on your radar what you think is right. You need to think about holistically whether my work is going to impact the other person's and vice versa. So keep it simple and practical. I call this as KISS, keep it simple, stupid. In IT, we have actually made things so complex. So one of the problems that we have in terms of making complexity is we undermine how we can make it much more easy for people to follow up. And we give them jargons, people just goes over your head. So one of the things you need to kind of focus is to make it much more simple and practical so people can kind of follow it rather than just going and brainstorming on a lot of those stuff. For example, if you want to sell the value of change management to an application development person, the focus should be is how do I minimize my risk so that your rollout is smooth enough and you don't have any bugs coming out of the system. So can we have a backup plan? Can you have a remediation plan to do that? So we need to kind of make this people feel much more ease rather than just talking about jargons. Last but not the least, if you are doing something, start to optimize it. Start to optimize and fine tune your existing process and then do automation. I've had several people who fall a trap to automate. Yeah, we need to automate it. And they design an automation like this. You call up the service desk and it says, press 1 for this, press 2 for this, press 3 for this. And it just keeps on going. You're waiting to press 9 because you wanted someone else on the other side to kind of hear you out. So please don't automate for the sake of automation. Try to understand what value does it bring and make sure that you simplify the whole process, okay? So the focus here is these 7 guiding principles are kind of bringing it much more element universally applied. So irrespective of whether you are in a software industry, whether you are in a manufacturing industry, whether you're in a telecom industry or insurance business, all these guiding principles can firmly fit in very effectively. So try to look at this as a good aspect for us to run through this. Okay. Any questions so far? We can take a couple of questions more.
Sure. Yeah. So we have a question from Santosh. Mm-hmm. He asks, you have provided the airline example and how ITIL4 SVC can be used to provide value. Mm-hmm. Can you please elaborate why we cannot achieve the same outcome and value if we follow ITIL version 3?
Sure, that's a great question. Now, one of the things is about ITIL version 3, and we all know ITIL version 3 right from the beginning days is being focused on process-centric approach, right? So everybody started to focus on their process metrics in terms of key performance indicators, critical success factors. So there was no commonality to go beyond just the infrastructure process team to other teams. So the concept, I'm not saying that ITIL version 3 cannot be done, but the approach of appreciation towards a value stream concept, trying to understand everybody into the other divisions, like the other teams, like agile teams, the development teams, the operations teams, and have a common lingo. And that was something missing. So what I'm saying is that ITIL 4 enables you to come with a common lingo where each and everyone can start to resonate better and are able to address this better. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying ITIL version 3 I did not do that, but it is not explicitly told across. It has never been prescriptive. Now is the time to kind of get everybody onto the same page and start thinking about it holistically with the advent of Agile DevOps and how other teams are contributing together. One more question.
Thank you, Suresh. We have a question from Shiva. How does ITIL 4 processes go along with DevOps and Agile, which are very high velocity?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And that's why we will spend time when we come to the practices. We will talk about practices. So DevOps could be one of the practices. So practices is just not about your processes. It is about continuous integration as a practice, continuous delivery as a practice, continuous deployment as a practice. So these are elements that you will hear in DevOps that could be very much fit into your service lifecycle. So what we are trying to do is you already have Agile in terms of sprints, in terms of moving features every 2 to 4 weeks. You have DevOps in terms of continuous integration, integrating a piece of code earlier in the lifecycle, finding out defects, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, continuous testing, and then we will also have operations. Now, we are trying to build in the entire value chain of how each and every one can talk with each other and assimilate this information. So it actually now fits it perfectly on the value stream, and I'll give an example of that when we go into the specifics. Okay. One more question before we get to the next one, if there's any.
Thank you, Suresh. Yeah. So we have a question. Is the ITIL 4 a general standard without consideration of local custom and practices? How extensive is AI being currently used to customize process workflows for localized, maximized CX satisfaction?
Excellent question. The only thing that I want to tell you is ITIL is not a standard. It's a framework, whereas ISO 20000 is a standard, right? A standard is something which you can comply with. Now, a great question that you asked in terms of the AI ops. Now, one of the things that you will see, and I'll tell you some use case of what we are doing with our clients. We are having a lot of tickets that we have over a period of time collected as part of your recordings, as well as the incident record and problem records. So we are enabling AI, artificial intelligence, to look at the trends, and some of those tickets that are going to come across can be auto-resolved. So what we are seeing is that AI ops being much more popular these days in a form of chatbots, looking at the number of tickets that you've raised and looks at a trend and a pattern. There's another scenario that we have seen. We are delivering in a site lab engineering course last week, where there's a lot of monitoring happening, right? So infrastructure monitoring is happening, application monitoring is happening, tools like New Relic, App Dynamics, Dynatrace are doing it, but there's so much noise in terms of alerts. How to kind of look at a meaningful dimension of which alert we need to act upon is something that we are also seeing happening in the from value stream from an AI ops perspective. So there's a definite amount of use case to reduce manual labor, and also what we call as toil in SRE terms, site reliability engineering terms, but also kind of bring in more efficiency and effectiveness. So it doesn't tell you this is what you need to do, but you are feel free to kind of opt, which is useful across. And technology is becoming the center today to make this much more effective. Yeah? Okay, so we'll go on to the core of the service value system and then service value chain. So the service value chain is what I call as the nucleus, or the center in which ITIL 4 operates. But that service value chain, what we call as the embryo or the nucleus, has been bound inside with a system of service value system. So this diagram is called the service value system. So you have an opportunity or demand, an opportunity to improve, or a demand that could happen. And you have this 7 guiding principles that can oversee end-to-end where you are in the journey map and how we need to do. Governance. So this is where COBIT comes into picture, where we focus on benefit realization, risk optimization, resource optimization. So you already see frameworks kind of combining here. So the service value chain has practices. Now someone asked how Agile and DevOps comes in. It will fit into these kind of practices. In addition to just incident problem change, we have like kind of risk management as a practice. We can actually have release and deployment as a practice. Now release and deployment as a practice can definitely bring in Agile and DevOps, right? And also when you look at the entire value chain, there's a lot of wastages in terms of what we do. And that's where lean comes in. And continual improvement is a way that we can improve. So it could be every 2 weeks or 4 weeks, like Agile, we can release your sprints. So your continual service improvement can look at all your improvements in a form of a backlog or a kind of the process backlog and start to improve on the whole thing. And finally, it has to deliver value. So if I look at these dimensions and put the other frameworks, so opportunities demand is where business relationship management comes in, where we talk a lot about demand shaping. A very strategic one, and in ITIL 4, they brought something called as relationship management as a practice. So that's something that you can think about how to kind of focus on relationship building. The practices, as I said, could be your Scrum, could be your Kanban, could be your pair programming, your test-driven development. All of those stuff can be brought as part of your practices. So this is very much fitting into your value chain and see how we can move things faster, but also ensure that it is stable enough. And governance is where COBIT comes in. So COBIT is a framework for governance. So COBIT stands for Control Objectives for Business, Control Objectives for Information Related Technology. The latest version is COBIT 2019. The earlier version was COBIT 5.0. So Ayasaka is the owner of that. BRM is provided by BRM Institute. Agile has got Scrum, Scrum Alliance, Scrum.org. DevOps is kind of independent, right? So you can kind of look at this as a philosophy to do that. But last but not the least is across the value chain, are we seeing some improvements? So you look at lean as part of value, wastages, and then start to deliver value. So this is a very important concept that they've brought in, where they're bringing in all the different frameworks and methodologies to start going hand in hand together so that we can start to socialize appropriately. Now we come to the nucleus, right? If I kind of break down the nucleus, now that is where I think we go into a little more detail. So at a high level, so if I go back here, this service value chain is now broken into a bigger part, like opening up, where we have the demand here, and you start to have the first one called engage. So we are kind of engaging with your stakeholders, your primary stakeholders, your internal stakeholders, your external stakeholders, and start to plan. Now, what is plan? We need to understand the vision. Why are we doing this product or service? What's our current status? How are we engaging with our customers? And look at the 4 dimensions. Remember the organizations and people, the value chains and processes, and the suppliers and partners, technology and information technology, right? So we need to look at from all the 4 dimensions to see how am I delivering this product and service today. Then we'll talk about improve, which is kind of the improvement life cycle. So it could be your continual service improvement. If it's an already what I call as a brownfield, you kind of improve from improving your optimization of efficiency, your effectiveness, and turnaround rates and stuff like that. So that's from an improvement perspective. That is probably also what you call a CSI. You need to make improvement holistically, right? You don't like look at just as process level. You look at people, process, products, and partners. Then we talk about engage. Now, this is where you need to understand the implicit demand. You need to have the conversation with stakeholders. Go beyond your SLAs. In fact, we are now dealing with a lot of clients where we are proposing not service level agreements, but experience level agreements. At the end of the day, just because you gave a meeting your SLAs doesn't make him a happy customer. They really want to kind of gain value of what we do. So create the transparency, and kind of how do you communicate in the times of distress is something that you think about from an engagement standpoint. Now, design and transition, this goes back in the ITIL version 3 days of how to use to do a service design package. But now you see they are kind of combining it together. So they have the service design and transition built together. So which means that when you're designing for fit for purpose and fit for use, right? So you look at availability, capacity, continuity, and all of those stuff, but also look at transition like change management, configuration management. They both have to go hand in hand together. It's not a separate process anymore because we need to have a lot of a collaboration between these two systems for it to actually deliver value, right? So how to meet the expectation from quality, cost, and time to market is the focus of this aspect of design and transition within the service value chain. Next, we kind of look at obtain and build. So you can actually kind of buy in something outside as part of components, assemble it and deliver the product, or you can build it in-house, right? So you need to look at your components. So if you are trying to deliver a Benz car, you might want to look at in terms of airbags, in terms of security, in terms of resilience if you get a head-on collision. So you kind of need to design based on fit for purpose and fit for use. So think about dimensions that we will think about how it will work in real sense. And last but not the least is our core of operations. We all know as part of ITIL version 3, we used to say that the real value happens when you are actually doing it in terms of service operations. So how do we kind of focus on delivering and supporting together, right? So could be a shipment being delivered, but also supporting that in the case of Amazon, when if you know that the product is not good enough, you can replace or you can place an order, it can be quickly kind of refunded and you're able to do that. So focus on deliver and support as an integral part to keep the lights on, but also to constantly get quick feedback and improve your stakeholder experience, okay? So this is a very important part, and based on that, we are going to talk about a use case of how this particular value stream can be kind of thought over. So the question would be, coming back is, each and everything is a value stream. Now what I mean to be that, so that could be one value stream where you go from demand to engage, to obtain and build, to deliver and support and value. They may not even have design and transition because it's a kind of ongoing product that you're doing it. But there are certain scenarios we will probably skip this, but we will probably do this obtain and build, design and transition, products and services. So that could be multiple value streams that could depend on a use case. So in this example, and because you also actually asked for how can this be applied in the context of a practical example of ITIL 4, look at your user support today. So user support could be through mail, it could be through self-service, it could be through phone, it could be through fax. So we need to start to look at what are the activities that we get to engage for a user support in terms of logging the request, in terms of providing a knowledge base, in terms of providing a quick feedback loop, or calling them, or a field service support itself. Go there and kind of start to think about it. So I've just given an example where one of the user support is acknowledge and register the user query, right? So you need to investigate, classify an incident, get a fix from the specialist team. This is what we call as troubleshooting in terms of troubleshooting, and then you get a incident resolved and request a feedback. So what kind of value stream will you kind of primarily use? So if you look at this value stream of deliver and support is going to be the part because it's keeping the lights on. So we'll probably focus more of it when you get a request directly. Engage should be there because the service desk will come here, but it will try to boil down to this part because the whole part of is dividing around keep the lights on and start to communicate back. So it has to go back again to engage and then come back to across. So think about this as a good use case for us to start picking up which value stream will be useful for keeping the lights on, which value stream will be useful for a new product release, which value stream will be focused on rolling out new features. So you can kind of have the permutation combination of a value stream and start to see how we can deliver value. So we are not going to go into the level of details, but from a process and a practice standpoint, they have now divided into 3 zones: general management practices, service management practices, and technical management practices. Now, someone is asking, how can DevOps works? One of the things, if you look at technical management practices like deployment management, infrastructure and platform management, software development management, this is where your Agile, your DevOps, your site reliability engineering, your cloud, your mobility, all will come into picture. So think about this just beyond just ITIL. We are looking at this end-to-end, how can we deliver value? There are also some interesting general management practices, like for example, workforce and talent management, focusing on architecture management. These were not really part of ITIL earlier, but they now understand we need to think holistically, and that's how it's kind of brought into picture. So essentially, I think we need to start looking at practices which are comprehensive of people, process, products, partners, or dimensions everything, including your use case, as well as some of those technology elements inbuilt across the board. So last one, before we kind of go and take up the questions, is the certification scheme, right? So if you look at ITIL 4, they kind of broke down into ITIL Foundation as a class that they start bringing in. And then they divide it into specialist course. So one of the course is create, deliver, and support as a specialist course. Then we have drive stakeholder value as a specialist course. Then they have this high velocity IT. So one of the questions people were asking about Agile and DevOps, how does it fit in? This course of high velocity IT gives you how you can apply Agile and DevOps in the context of your ITIL value stream. And they're giving some use cases. And so depending on where you are in the chain, you can pick and choose what is kind of relevant for you, and then start to pick things that are. So high velocity IT talks about all the technology advancement, Agile, DevOps, IoT, machine learning, blockchain. How do you kind of leverage some of the best practices around, but not into it's technology agnostic, but it gives you some of the best practices. How do you go about doing that? Then direct, plan, and improve is kind of the continual improvement that we need to think about, an aspect. So we now look at some things in red color, some things in blue color. And if you're an ITIL V3 expert, then you can actually do this course called the bridge course that will kind of compress you to do all of this together. It's a bridge course, but you need to do the digital and IT strategy to become a strategic leader. So either you become an ITIL foundation or an individual specialist, or you can become a managing professional, and then you can become a strategic leader. So I came from the ITIL version 2 days. I was an ITIL V2 Masters. I became ITIL V3 expert by Bridge, and I'm now an ITIL 4 managing professional. I know that there will be a lot of questions on that, but the question is that if you have 17 credits in the ITIL version 3, you can do the ITIL 4 managing course. So the good news is that all your certifications that you've gained in ITIL version 3 still remains relevant, that you can actually put it across and then start to kind of use it for your future purposes. So that's about that. I'll see a few things before we kind of take the Q&A. There are upcoming webinars, and please give your feedback as well as we start to have these conversations. We are trying to line up for the next 2 sessions, and I'll be hosting both the sessions as part of the digital transformation service of Freshworks, where we have a ringside chat with ASEAN ITSM thought leaders, where we'll talk about what is digital transformation, how ITSM can help evolving into the digital transformation, some of the pitfalls, some of the lessons. That's a great session to be in, to hear from thought leaders. We are also kind of looking at how is IT operation changing dimensions. We'll talk about something like site reliability engineering, some of the things about AI ops, and some of the things that we can think about operations being still relevant in the digital age. So that's a part that we will kind of start to think about. But I'll first get to a poll question 3, and then we will start to open up a Q&A. So this is the last, I think there was one more poll, but this is the last poll before the Q&A. Plus, if you could just fill in your details, it'll be so helpful for us to ensure that we give in more content like this to make this much more engaging. And we are very specifically focused on the Asia Pacific market, because I think that we need to grow this community much more higher. There's a lot of experts on that. So we want to kind of suitably kind of focus on a time zone very relevant for Asia Pacific, that you can add your dimensions, and stay tuned for more opportunities as you start to sign up for some of these webinars going forward. So we'll give another 20 seconds time for people to key in some of those elements. And we will take it up beyond as we start to take it forward. And probably we will probably have about 7 minutes. Yeah, so I think I'll end the poll, and then we will start the Q&A. So as I end the poll, I see 52% focusing on IT operations in the digital age. So Yuvraj, I think that's getting a lot of traction. 38% talk about digital transformation, and they're also asking about more information. So probably we will kind of collect all your feedbacks and start to come up with the rest of the questions. So with no further ado, I think I want to kind of get into the Q&A mode. Yuvraj, if you can start asking these questions. Yuvraj, you there?
Yes, yes. Yes, Suresh, sorry, yeah. So Shiva has a question for us. He asked how specifically we can tailor processes when release volumes in companies like Spotify or Netflix is like 2000 per day across infrastructure,
Sure.
around microservices, Docker swarms, etc.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things we all know that in a DevOps world, we move away from a monolithic architecture to a microservice architecture. So the way ITSM will start to gain is we will not have normal changes like where we used to have a change advisory board every 2 weeks time. Those days are all gone. So it will be kind of microservices, micro releases. So it will be risk less. So it could be kind of assume like a standard change. So the dimensions of how we will operate today will have to be much more flexible in order to be more relevant in the world of DevOps. I totally agree. You have to go faster. We cannot have ITIL hold on the baton saying that we can stay for a long period of time. Next.
Thank you, Suresh. So we have one more question. Which is, we have already implemented ITIL V3 in my company, comprising of most of the processes such as incident problem, change, etc. What's the benefit of incorporating ITIL4 service value system or service value chain in my current operations, and how can I do that?
Great. So I think, as I said, one of the guiding principles that I said is start from where you are. So you already have incident problem change kind of built in, but I think we need to now start to integrate it better in terms of how do I kind of do more structural resolutions? Is there any kind of techniques that we can use it? So how can I also kind of collaborate with the rest of the teams, right? It's not just the process team or the infrastructure team. How can I work with application development team so that I can be a part of their designing process? For example, how can I contribute non-functional requirements like the performance part, the capacity part, the availability part as a feedback to them? So now you need to start to think with their existing processes, how do we can make and develop this as an end-to-end value chain? So it's a great opportunity for us to now start to work within the enterprise, within the cross-functional teams, and start to learn from each other. So we can pick a lot of knowledge from application development, operations, and we can also kind of learn from each other. So I think that's a good starting point, but also start to think beyond your operations and your system with other teams to collaborate and promote visibility. Any other questions that you have, please feel to put it in your support window. I know that we covered a lot of content within a short period of time. You will have the recording as well as the slides available, but I really want you to take this opportunity to ask the questions so that we have a last 4 minutes that we can kind of handle. And then I'll do a bit of poll 4 before we kind of wrap it out in the scheme of things.
Thank you, Suresh. So we have one more question, which is, within the multiple demand service chains, how does ITIL4 treat the implementation differences among multiple channels in on-prem, hybrid, or cloud environments?
That's a great question. So one of the things is I think ITIL4 focuses on value. So if I kind of go back to my things across here, the implementation part will be either a part of your uptime build or design and transition. So we allow it for the teams to decide how it works across. As long as you're getting feedback loops or you're getting value, people don't go into that level of details because you know it better. As a team that is implementing cloud, on-prem, on hybrid, you know how things are working. As long as you're able to move faster and get feedback loops, we rely on you. And remember this one, we are not holding anybody for the sake of following ITIL. If something is following well within your own scheme of thing in terms of Agile, DevOps, do it. Trying to see how we can integrate it together. So let's not go into deep dive into what implementation done, ITIL does. That's not the whole part. It's looking at the entire value chain, and we need to trust people in this world. I mean, there's people are on the ground. They've been doing deployments after deployments very well. So leave it to them. And if they need it, let's kind of brainstorm. Otherwise, I think you're good. So don't think too much about dating in deep about what ITIL will do in terms of implementation. Absolutely no problem. Do whatever you want, and whatever works for you works for everyone.
Thank you, Suresh. Can we take the poll question 4 now?
Yeah, correct. I think we need to take this poll question 4 because we are kind of closely towards that, so that just being conscious of the time. And if you have any further questions, we will kind of consolidate it and send it across to you as we start doing that. Yeah, go ahead on the poll question 4, Yuvraj.
Thank you.
If you could launch that, and people can take a minute to kind of fill that. Is it already launched? People are seeing that?
Yes, Suresh, it's launched.
Okay, because probably it's loading up a little late for me. Is it done, Yuvraj, or I'm not able to see the screen yet?
Seems like some technical issue. Let me launch the poll again.
Yeah. Yeah. So the last one in terms of, are you interested in knowing more about the Freshworks ITSM solution? Please do say things so that it will help them to reach out to you post that session. Yeah. So we'll give you another 30 more seconds for people to answer. And we really appreciate your time for the whole session, to picking them and choosing across. And we hope we are able to deliver some value. Your feedback is quite important to us, and we will start to make webinars much more attractive, as well as just much more meaningful for you guys. So feel free to kind of give us that opportunity to serve the Asia Pacific market. And we're very excited, and thanks to Freshworks for sponsoring this webinar and getting more of our industry veterans coming here and sharing some of the insights. We really want to do much more stuff. Okay, so I'll probably end this, Paul, and a couple of housekeeping rules before we end this part. So 55% have asked for information to do that, which is great. So I'm not saying whether you can see that results. So 55% wants to know more about that. So that's a part. So let's move on. As a last part.
Like 2 more questions.
Sure.
Would you like take it, or could we consolidate it and send it across?
We can take. Let me just do. We can take one question and then we'll kind of consolidate it. So you can reach out to me I'm on social media, Twitter, and if you have any questions and what kind of conversations we need to have to build in your ecosystem, some of the challenges that you have in implementing, we really want to address as part of the upcoming webinars. So we really encourage you to kind of post, tweet, and reach out for us to do more, right? And in terms of the quick things, please look at, you will get an invite if you want to register from on April 28th and May 28th upcoming webinars. So I would definitely encourage you to pass it on to your colleagues and friends so that everybody can get benefits about that, because nothing beats a face-to-face conversation and stuff like that. So I hope that you can do. We can have one more question and then we can kind of wrap it up, Yuvraj.
Sure, Suresh. Thank you. This is a question from Shiva. He asked, what aspects around the current process should the company typically focus on as part of digital transformation, either internal or providing it as part of solutions to the clients?
I think we all have to understand, and I go with this word, that how you treat your internal stakeholders matters more in compared to what you deliver outside. Just because it's a commercially business where you get revenue, it's not that you should focus on. Obviously, I think there's a revenue part of it, so probably people tend to focus on outside the system. But I think you need to also look at in your own payroll applications or HR applications. How can I actually do digital transformation? How can I make my claim reimbursement process much more digital? So I think it has to be both ways. I cannot kind of put the onus just on because it's a customer-facing scenario outside, because at the end of the day, your employees also have to be motivated, and also your internal stakeholders. So I think it hands both hand together. So with that, I'll kind of thank you everyone for your time today. You've been such a great audience, and we thank for your time, and feel free to kind of stay in touch with us for more questions, and we will be absolutely delighted to offer you more opportunities to ask questions and encourage. And I look forward to seeing you in the next webinar on April 28th. Thanks, Yuvraj, Rahul, and the Freshworks team for putting a great session, and also looking at as part of the Freshworks digital transformation series. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Suresh. Thank you, everyone who has joined the webinar today. Thank you, Rahul.
Thank you, guys.